When you pick up a Richard Mille for the first time, what do you feel? Because users have been feeling that it feels like a toy, a child left behind on the playground. The case is made from materials that sound like materials from science fiction. Carbon TPT, Quartz TPT, grade 5 titanium. It is thinner than most phones. It barely registers on your wrist. But then someone tells you the price. The entry models start at $80,000. The popular ones sit between $100,000 and $300,000. There are versions that cost over $2 million. All are a watch that feels like plastic. How is this possible? Once you understand how Richard Mille actually works, what it really sells, and who it's really for, you stop asking how they got away with it. You start asking what it did to the rest of the industry. The mystery. The year is 2001. The watch world has a very clear idea of what expensive looks like. Gold, platinum, complicated mechanical movements, deep dials with grand complications visible through sapphire casebacks. The watch that costs $100,000 in 2001 is a Patek Philippe, maybe a Vacheron Constantin. It is made by a brand that has been making watches since the 1800s. It weighs something. It feels like the price in your hand. Then, a man named Richard Mille walks into Baselworld, the most important watch fair in the world, and shows everyone something they have never seen. The RM001 Tourbillon does not look like an expensive Swiss watch. It looks like a spaceship part. The case is asymmetric and industrial. The movement is entirely visible, not through a window, but because the dial itself is almost entirely transparent. Every gear, spring, and bridge is exposed. The lugs are held to the case by screws. It looks like someone disassembled a precision instrument and decided it was more interesting this way. People did not know what to make of it. The Swiss watch establishment, brands with centuries of history, looked at it the way old restaurants look at someone who puts ketchup on their food, politely horrified. This was not how serious watches were supposed to look. There were rules, proportions, heritage, respect for what came before. Consider who was in that room at Baselworld in 2001. Watchmakers whose families had been building movements in the same valleys for 5 generations. Brand directors whose companies had survived 2 world wars and a quartz crisis that nearly destroyed the entire industry. Journalists who had spent careers learning to evaluate watches by standards that had been established over centuries. Buyers from the most prestigious retailers in the world. They all saw the same thing. A man with no manufacturing heritage, no history, no watchmaking dynasty behind him. A former industry executive who had spent his career selling other people's watches, showing up with something that broke every aesthetic rule they held sacred, and pricing it like a Patek Philippe. Richard Mille ignored all of them, intentionally, publicly, with obvious pleasure. The price of the RM001, approximately $150,000. In 2001, at that moment, nobody knew whether this was genius or a very expensive joke. The Swiss watch world assumed it would pass. It did not pass. By 2005, collectors who had bought early were sitting on significant premiums. By 2010, the secondary market was doing things that made no rational sense. By 2015, Kering, the luxury conglomerate that owns Gucci, Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, and half of European fashion, tried to buy the brand. Richard Mille and his partner Dominique Guénot said no. They did not need the money. They did not need the infrastructure. They were already the most expensive watch brand in the world by average price, and they had built it from nothing in under 15 years. Before we get to what is uncomfortable about Richard Mille, let's defend them a bit. You know, in the spirit of fairness. The defense. The materials Richard Mille uses are genuinely extraordinary. Carbon TPT, thin-ply technology, is not simply carbon fiber. It is 600 to 800 layers of carbon fiber, each 30 microns thick, about the diameter of a human hair, stacked at alternating 45-degree angles and compressed in an autoclave at 120 degrees Celsius under 6 atmospheres of pressure. The result is a material that weighs almost nothing, absorbs impact better than steel, and produces a unique wood-grain visual pattern because no 2 pieces are ever identical. The process takes days. Very few manufacturers in the world can do it at the tolerances Richard Mille demands. Quartz TPT uses the same layering process with silica fibers instead of carbon. Some versions incorporate colored pigments between layers. producing watches that look like geological cross-sections, vivid stripes running through the case at angles that shift under different light. Each case is essentially one of a kind. The movements are genuinely engineered. Several RM movements use grade 5 titanium components, the same alloy in aerospace structural parts and biomedical implants, to reduce weight in the gear train. The tolerances involved in machining a gear to this standard are extreme. A human hair is approximately 70 microns thick. Some RM movement components are machined to within 5 microns of specification. And then there are the athletes. Rafael Nadal wears his Richard Mille while playing Grand Slam tennis matches. He has been wearing the same model, the RM27 series, during play since 2010. The watch survives a tennis swing that generates forces measured at up to 1,200 Gs at the tip of the racket. The movement continues to function accurately throughout. Let me explain what the 1,200 Gs means. Fighter jet pilots experience up to 9 Gs during combat maneuvers. A car crash at highway speed generates roughly 100 Gs. Nadal's serve creates more than 10 times that force at the point of contact. Engineers who designed the watch had to build a movement that could survive that force, repeatedly, for years, through thousands of matches, without losing accuracy. They did it. The watch kept running. Bubba Watson wore his Richard Mille during his Masters wins. Felipe Massa wore one in an F1 cockpit at speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour and lateral G-forces that make everything in the car feel 4 times heavier than it should. McLaren has had a technical partnership with the brand for years. Real engineering collaboration, not just logo placement. These are not endorsements, they are demonstrations. So when someone asks, why does it cost this much? There is a real technical answer. The materials are legitimate. The engineering is real. The performance has been tested in conditions that would destroy most other watches. For a moment, the defense holds, until you start looking deeper. The first crack. Let's talk about what things actually cost. Carbon TPT is expensive to produce. The process is genuinely complex, but it is not a rare material in an absolute sense. Aerospace manufacturers and sporting goods companies use it at industrial scale. At the volumes Richard Mille uses it, the cost per case is significant, but it is not the cost of a mansion. Independent analysts who have examined the economics of luxury watchmaking estimate that the total material and manufacturing cost of an RM watch, movement, case, crystal, strap, assembly, represents somewhere between 3 and 7% of the retail price. To put that another way, a watch that retails for $150,000 may cost somewhere between $4,500 and $10,500 to produce. Sit with that number for a moment. A watch that costs $10,000 to build, selling for $150,000, a markup of 15 to 1. In some models, more. The markup is not unique to Richard Mille. Patek Philippe, Rolex, Hermes, every luxury brand works with significant margin. The difference is not the margin. The difference is what the margin is justified by. Patek Philippe charges for heritage, craft, and the specific mechanical complexity of a movement that took years to develop. There is something to point to in the watch itself, the finishing, the complications, the tradition that carries the price beyond its component cost. A watchmaker at Patek Philippe who has spent 30 years hand-chamfering movement bridges to a standard that takes decades to reach, that person's labor is part of what you are buying. It is not immortalized in the watch's marketing. It is immortalized in the watch. What does Richard Mille charge for? The Carbon TPT is impressive, but Carbon TPT also appears in bicycle frames, motorsport bodywork, and sporting equipment that does not cost $100,000. The grade 5 titanium is genuinely aerospace grade, but aerospace-grade titanium is used in hip replacements and aircraft components at costs that do not approach anything near luxury watch pricing. The engineering of the movement is real, but Richard Mille does not make its own movements from scratch. Several key movement components are produced by external suppliers, including movement specialist Audemars Piguet, Renault, and Papi for some complications. The answer is not the Carbon TPT. The Carbon TPT is the artifact. What Richard Mille charges for is the signal, the statement. The thing the watch communicates about the person wearing it before they say a single word. You are not paying for what the watch is. You are paying for what the watch means. And this is where the word scam starts to apply, or doesn't, depending entirely on whether you think meaning can be sold. This is where watchmaking quietly stopped being about watches. The engine. Remove the objects entirely. Forget the carbon TPT and the grade 5 titanium and Nadal's backhand. Look at the system, because Richard Mille is not just a watch brand. It is a machine designed to produce one specific outcome, the feeling that owning one puts you in a room that most people will never enter. Here is how the machine works. Number 1. Scarcity as a weapon. In 2025, Richard Mille produced approximately 5,950 watches. Rolex produced roughly 1.1 million. Patek Philippe produced around 60,000. Richard Mille makes less than 1% of Rolex's output. The entire annual production of Richard Mille would fill less than 2 days of Rolex manufacturing. To make this concrete, if you lined up every Richard Mille watch made in 2025 side by side, you would have a line roughly a kilometer long. If you did the same with Rolex's annual production, you would have a line stretching from London to Madrid. This is not because they cannot make more. They are not constrained by their machines or their craftsmen or their supply chain. They are constrained by choice. Controlled scarcity is policy. The allocation model works like this. Which boutique gets how many pieces is determined by the brand. Which customer within that boutique gets a specific reference is determined by relationship, purchase history, and the boutique's own vetting process. You cannot simply walk in and buy the model you want. You are assessed, you are considered, you are selected, or you are not. The brand has turned purchasing into an audition, and the audition itself is the product. Not the watch, the feeling of having passed the audition. The confirmation that you belong to the tier that gets the call. When Kering, the luxury conglomerate that owns Gucci and Saint Laurent, tried to acquire Richard Mille in 2013, Richard Mille and Dominique Guénat said no. At that point, they were already generating hundreds of millions in revenue. They did not need Kering's distribution infrastructure or their capital. They were operating a system that required no outside help to maintain. What outside ownership would have done was introduce shareholder pressure to grow production. That would have meant more watches. More watches would have meant more supply. More supply would have diluted the scarcity, and the scarcity was not incidental to the brand. The scarcity was the brand. The scarcity is not accidental. It is the product, not the watch, the access to the watch. Number 2, athletes as proof, not endorsement. Nadal does not wear an RM because Richard Mille is paying him to wear it at a photo shoot. He wears it during actual competition, in actual conditions, against actual opponents, while 200 million people watch. The watch survives. Every Grand Slam he has won while wearing one is a product demonstration that no advertising budget can replicate. By 2025, he had won 22 Grand Slam titles while wearing Richard Mille watches. The brand did not sell beauty. It sold invincibility. The watch is not for the person who appreciates fine craft in a quiet way. It is for the person who wants to be associated with performance at the absolute edge of human capability. That is a different product, a different customer, a different psychology entirely. Number 3, the visibility loop. Richard Mille watches are loud entirely by design. The asymmetric cases, the visible movements, the extraordinary color, none of this is accidental, and none of it is for the watchmaker's satisfaction. It is built to be seen from across a room, to be identifiable from a photograph, to create an immediate hierarchy in any space where one is present. It is not a watch, it is a billboard that moves. Think about what this means in practice. You walk into a room, there are 100 people in it. Most of them are successful, comfortably wealthy, some extremely so. Their watches are good, some are excellent. A Rolex here, a Patek there, an IWC or two. None of it stands out. Then one person walks in wearing an RM. The room notices. Not because everyone there is a watch enthusiast, because the visual language of that specific object, its shape, its color, its scale, transmits one piece of information instantly and perfectly. This person operates at a level most people in this room do not. No explanation required, no conversation needed. The watch did it. The person wearing a steel Patek Philippe sports watch has made a statement that requires knowledge to decode. You have to know what you're looking at. You have to have spent time in the world of serious horology to understand that the plain dial and simple hands represent decades of finishing craft at a price point that exceeds most luxury goods. Without that knowledge, the Patek looks like a nice watch, nothing more. The person wearing a Richard Mille has made a statement that requires no knowledge at all. The visual language is immediate. The price signal is immediate. The room understands it without asking. This is not an accident of design. This is the design. Number 4. The service trap. Owning a Richard Mille is expensive. Keeping a Richard Mille running is a commitment. Service intervals vary by model, but most RM watches require professional service every 3 to 5 years. The cost of a standard service, movement service, case overhaul, gasket replacement, regulation runs from several $1,000s to over $10,000 for complex pieces. Specialized models with unusual complications or exotic materials cost more. Parts are, by definition, not available from any other source. The brand controls the service ecosystem completely. There is no independent watchmaker who can fully service an RM. There is no aftermarket parts supply. You go back to Richard Mille, or you go without. This matters for a specific reason. Every time a Richard Mille owner brings their watch in for service, they re-enter the brand relationship. They go back to the boutique. They interact with the brand's representatives. They are reminded of their membership in the ecosystem. They see the new models. The service is not just maintenance, it is retention. There is a collector who has owned 4 Richard Mille watches over 12 years. He calculated once that between purchases, services, and associated costs, he has spent approximately $1.8 million with the brand. He still has 2 of the watches. He is considering a third. He said, "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm not confused about what I'm paying for, and I'm still doing it." That is either the most expensive hobby in the world, or it is the most honest one. He is paying for exactly what he is receiving. The brand has never deceived him. You do not simply buy a Richard Mille, you join something. And once you are in, the cost of leaving, not just the financial cost, but the social cost of no longer wearing one in the rooms where wearing one matters, is significant. There is a reason some collectors get angry when they see one. Not confused, angry. We will come back to that. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long-term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. What it did to watches. Here is the part that matters most. The part that the price of an RM is only the beginning of. Before Richard Mille, the watch industry had a more or less agreed-upon value framework. Craft creates value. A movement that took years to develop, with finishing done by hand to specifications that take a lifetime of practice to achieve. That justifies its price by pointing at what it took to build. The object earns its price by being extraordinary in itself. Patek Philippe is the clearest example. A grand complication Patek is not expensive because of what it signals. It is expensive because of what it is. The movement inside contains hundreds of individual components, each finished to a standard that other watchmakers study. The price reflects the object. Richard Mille changed the axis. After Richard Mille proved that a watch could generate CHF 1.75 billion in annual revenue from fewer than 6,000 pieces on the basis of signal value rather than craft value, on the basis of what wearing it communicates rather than what building it required, the industry was forced to respond. AP got louder. The Royal Oak, which was already famous, became ubiquitous in a way it had never been before. The brand leaned into the cultural visibility that Richard Mille had demonstrated was worth more than any mechanical complication. Hublot doubled down on exotic materials and celebrity partnerships. Jacob & Co. began building watches that were theatrical objects as much as timekeeping instruments. Even the staid Swiss establishment started thinking differently about visibility. The second consequence is subtler and more important. The new buyer that Richard Mille created, and that AP and Hublot subsequently chased, is not the traditional watch collector. The traditional collector values restraint, heritage, and the deep satisfaction of owning something whose quality is invisible to most people. The Grand Seiko on the wrist of someone who has spent 30 years learning to appreciate dial finishing. The Patek in the drawer that nobody at the dinner table would recognize as extraordinary. The new buyer values visibility, speed, and recognition. They want the room to understand immediately. They are not interested in the story behind the dial. They are interested in the story the dial tells about them. These two buyers are now occupying the same market, and they increasingly cannot stand each other. There is a scene that plays out in collector communities constantly. A traditional collector posts their piece. Someone replies with enthusiasm and tags a Richard Mille. The first collector says nothing, or says something careful, and the temperature in the room drops. Not because either person is wrong, because they are not playing the same game. They have entirely different definitions of what a great watch is. Richard Mille did not follow the market. It rewired it. The anger some collectors feel when they see one is not snobbery. It is grief. They are watching the value system they built their hobby around get replaced by something fundamentally different. The watch on the other person's wrist is not bad. It is not wrong. It just comes from a completely different set of answers to the question, what makes something worth owning? The traditional collector spent years learning to see. Learning to distinguish the quality of a chamfered edge on a movement bridge. Learning why a specific lacquer technique on a Grand Seiko dial produces depth that printed dials cannot replicate. Learning the history behind a complication, what problem it solved, who first solved it, what it meant in its time. This knowledge took years to accumulate. It was the currency of the hobby. The more you knew, the more you saw. The more you saw, the more you appreciated. The appreciation itself was the reward. Richard Mille does not require this knowledge. It requires no knowledge. The price tag communicates everything the room needs to understand. The person wearing $200,000 on their wrist does not need you to have studied dial finishing for a decade to read the signal correctly. The signal is immediate, universal, and devastating in its clarity. The collector who spent 30 years developing a refined eye suddenly finds themselves in rooms where that refinement is irrelevant. The most expensive watch in the room is the most powerful. Full stop. No context required. That is the collision. That is why the temperature drops. Richard Mille did not follow the market. It rewired it. Here is the specific mechanism of that rewiring. Before Richard Mille, the luxury watch market had an implicit ceiling on how far you could push price without mechanical justification. A Patek Philippe Grand Complication at $200,000 was justified by its movement. Hundreds of components, years in development, finishing that took lifetimes to master. The price had a foundation. You could point to it. Richard Mille proved that the foundation was optional. If you controlled the signal, if you made the watch visually unmissable and socially legible, the market would pay the price without requiring the mechanical justification. The question was never, does this movement warrant this price? The question was, is this the object that conveys the right message in the right room? Richard Mille answered yes, and charged accordingly. Once that was proven, the rules changed permanently. The watch industry spent the decade after Richard Mille's rise trying to figure out which game it was playing. Some brands decided they were in the signal business. Others decided they were in the craft business. The market that had been one thing became two things. The two things do not communicate well. Richard Mille did not create this split intentionally. It is a consequence, not a conspiracy. But it is real and permanent, and still playing out every time a traditional collector and a new buyer end up in the same room comparing what they own and why. That collision is still happening. It will not be resolved. Richard Mille made sure of that in 2001, when a man who had never built a watch before walked into the most important watch fair in the world with something that looked like a spaceship part and charged $150,000 for it. Most of them, eventually, paid it. The rest got angry. Both reactions were correct. So, is it a scam? Let's define the word properly. A scam is when you pay for something and receive something less than what you were promised. The exchange is fraudulent. You were deceived. By that definition. No, Richard Mille is not a scam. The watch is made from the materials they say it's made from. The engineering is real. The celebrities wearing them are actually wearing them. The production numbers are actually that low. When you buy a Richard Mille, you receive exactly what was described, and in most cases, the secondary market will give you back more than you paid. The RM 35-02 Nadal sells at auction for more than its retail price. The RM 11-03 McLaren holds its value in conditions where most luxury goods depreciate immediately. In 2025, the average secondary market price across Richard Mille references was approximately $252,000. These are not objects that fall apart. They are objects that appreciate. By any conventional investment metric, not a scam. A very good asset. Now remember the collectors who were angry. Here is the thing about their anger that nobody says directly. Some of them are angry because Richard Mille made the correct bet, and they did not. The people who dismissed the RM 1-inch 2001 as an expensive joke and bought something with more traditional credentials watched the RM appreciate at rates that traditional credentials could not match. The scam, if it is one, is the most profitable scam in the history of watchmaking for everyone who participated in it, including the buyers. But if a scam is selling something for more than it is physically worth, charging the price of a mansion for something that costs less than a car to manufacture, then the word is accurate in a technical sense. The margin is real. The gap between cost and price is enormous. The markup is justified entirely by the signal, not the substance. Here is the uncomfortable truth that the whole argument eventually arrives at. Richard Mille is not selling you a watch. Richard Mille is selling you a position in a hierarchy. The right to exist in certain rooms and be understood immediately. The right to be someone who owns one. The right to signal your membership in the most exclusive economic tier on Earth without saying a single word. Whether that is worth $200,000 is a question only you can answer. And the answer depends entirely on which rooms you're trying to enter. Somewhere tonight, someone is buying a Richard Mille. Not because they needed a watch. They already have a watch. Several. Not because the engineering convinced them, though it helped. Not because Nadal wears one, though they thought about Nadal when they decided. They are buying it because there is a specific room they walk into regularly, and there is a specific moment when the conversation shifts, and they want to be on the right side of that shift. They have thought about this purchase for months. They know the price, they know the service cost, they know that a significant portion of what they are paying for cannot be found inside the case. They know all of this, and they are buying it anyway. Because Richard Mille built something that the watch industry never had before. A brand that makes its buyers feel not just wealthy, but selected. Not just successful, but seen. The watch is not the point. The point is what happens in that room. Richard Mille understood this in 2001, built a system around it, changed the industry with it, and charged whatever they wanted for the access. That is either genius or a scam. Or it is both. At the same time. So, has this changed your view of Richard Mille? Let me know what you think in the comments. Like this video and subscribe.